Well, it's that time again. That time when we stop by our favorite retailer / tattoo parlor and ask ourselves a very simple set of questions. Is it okay to accessorize? If so, when is it too much? And why in the world is this a big deal? I'm joined today by Ken and special guests Kim and Leslie. I'm your host, Chris, and this is Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. Actually, two pastors, yes, because Greg is not here today. Pray for Greg. He hurt his back being weird. I think he just played too much disc golf. That's what that boils down to.
He sneezed wrong.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. Once you get over 50, you get out of a chair wrong, you throw your back out.
Yeah. And he's over 70, so.
You sneeze, you get a crick in your neck. Yeah, that's just kind of the way it is. So today's topic was requested by one of our listeners who will be the lucky recipient of the now world famous 3P coffee mug. So congratulations to Camille. Nice work. It's one that we probably would not have chosen ourselves simply because we're guys. So we don't often think about jewelry accessorizing or like things of that nature. But there's probably a lot of women in the church who have been taught one way or another about this issue or have questions. So we will try to answer this question from a theological perspective, especially under the covenant of grace. So you ladies out there are welcome to disagree with us. But at least you'll know where the Bible stands. And by the way, it's not just a woman's issue because we'll be talking a little bit about tattoos as well. They've become extremely popular. The listener asked specifically about piercings, tattoos, and makeup. But the larger issue is that of physical decoration in general. Like, what does the Bible have to say about such things? And more importantly, what guidance on this very subject or the subjective issue should we apply to our personal lives? So before we get into like the Bible verses, I want to know like initial thoughts. Like before we get into like the actual meat of the Word of God, like what are the initial thoughts that you guys have on this?
Well, I'm always reminded of what your dad used to say about makeup. He said, a little old paint or a little paint never hurt the old barn.
Yeah. He also said you can put a lipstick on a pig. Yeah.
Wait,
does it make her beautiful?
That's what I was going to say. There's more to that.
Yeah.
But did he say that around your mom?
No, Mom would have murdered him. Yeah.
Initial thoughts? Some people think way more deeply about it than I do. I just always get up, put my makeup on, put some earrings on, and
you put earrings on
every day. Now that's one thing I have to have earrings on.
That's out of control.
In fact, we went to dinner last night and I forgot to put earrings on, and I was in the car and I went, I don't have my earrings on.
What happened?
I had a spare pair in my purse.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
That was unusual. It was weird, but
that was
Did you feel weird without them on?
Yeah, it's like my one thing that I enjoy. I don't wear a lot of other stuff, but my earrings, it's like, I don't know.
That's because we can't afford a lot of other stuff. Yeah, so we get by with just the basics.
We just choose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my initial thought when I was approached about this was, is it more just the person's choice in what they feel comfortable in how they present themselves? It doesn't really bother me. I mean, I'm not much of a makeup, jewelry wearing type, but neither was my mom. My sisters did it excessively. So I think maybe that's why I'm kind of, I'm okay without it.
Like when you say excessively, are you talking about like glam rock band excessive or?
I would not maybe that bad, but to the point where, you're stepping on the floor and it's hairspray on the floor
Oh.
and, like
Yeah.
makeup all over the counter. And it was
Ew.
just like, ugh.
Did they have the big 80s hair?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Broccoli
Yeah.
bangs, the crimped hair
Oh.
spiral. Yes. all
Big,
that.
huge, like,
Yeah.
I did
up
the tease
front
bangs.
bangs.
Yeah, I did the tease bangs in middle school. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really start wearing makeup till my senior year in high school, which was very out of the norm for all the girls were wearing it. I was highly annoyed by it only because it like took more time.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I would rather sleep in the morning and get up later and not have to deal with the makeup. But then somewhere it changed.
I do have to share a funny highlight from yesterday. So when I told Shelby that I was going to do the podcast about makeup, jewelry, and tattoos, and she goes, "Why are they going to talk to you about that? You don't know makeup." And I said, "Yes, I do." She goes, "What is this called?" And I'm pointing to my cheeks. And I said, "Well, that's blush." And she goes, "Oh, okay, so you do know makeup."
Because you knew what blush was? Yeah.
No, she's just like, "Why do they want to talk to you?"
You don't know what you're talking about.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
that's a typical child.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just funny.
Now, what's your initial thoughts, Ken?
Well, I think.
I mean, you wrote the script, so you're
Well-
kind of ahead of the game a little bit. So,
I kind of saw this going several possible different ways, but my own personal perspective is that here in America, in this time in history, I think it's very influenced by our culture and tradition.
mhm.
You know, it's just kind of a way of life as opposed to other parts of the world where that would be very unusual.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cultural thing, but I do believe that there is an underlying reason for it, that it does say something about our spirituality and our maturity as a disciple of Christ as to the degree that we place importance on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Like how much value
Mhm.
is there in it for you? Yeah, for sure.
I think you see this, not always, I guess it's not a general rule, but I guess I see it more in terms of, for example, not that this is the stereotypical thing, but as a woman gets older, that becomes less important to her. Like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, makeup use seems to really decline because I think they then begin to just focus on what's most important in life. What do I really care about? What do I want to spend my time on? And lesser things begin to fall away. And I think if we kind of take that kind of a perspective towards it, why do we do it? And what does that say
Yeah.
about our own insecurities, our own faith?
So what I'm hearing you say is vanity, thy name is woman.
Oh, wow.
Is that
There's
what
a
you're
lot
saying?
of guys, though.
Is that I thought that's specifically what you said.
No,
No. Oh, okay.
Where's going through your headphones?
The AI is kicking in.
Yeah, I mean, and that obviously that culture changes over time. Going back decades, even, the usage of different things over time kind of changes. I can think, when I was a young kid, if you had a tattoo in church, you were considered to be like that was not a good thing. Like you need to cover that up.
It was highly rebellious.
Yeah. It was rebellious would have been the thought, but now it's become an accepted art form, really. And so it's interesting how the culture does alter over time and where Christianity sits with that. And one of the things I always think is interesting about standards is when we used to go to youth camp when we were younger, they used to talk a lot, and Proteins used to talk about this a lot, where you had the world kind of standard, and it was setting a kind of a standard for the way they dress and the way they look, and the level of their sexual promiscuity and that type of thing. And then the church always seemed to be like behind them because we wanted to maintain standards. But as the world kind of grew more and more promiscuous and more rebellious, the church kind of like tagged along with it to a degree. And so the average Christian in today, if you would take the average Christian today and put them into the church of the 1950s, they would be appalled at
Yeah.
what they see, because we've just kind of changed over time. And I guess the question you have to ask yourself is that necessarily a bad thing that reflects bad standards, or is it okay to be behind the world in its standards, based on where we are in society, and how far does that go?
Yeah.
Right. I think is the main question.
I think if you take that to a more extreme example, like if you plopped us in the middle, or if you pulled someone out of the Puritan era and dropped them in our modern day culture,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's like, this person has something relevant to say. You really need to listen to them. People would just totally ignore them. It's like, you're irrelevant to the extreme.
Yeah, at the very least, they would be so distracted by their appearance that it would be really off-putting. Yeah, and so obviously the way that you appear has a major impact on the way that you interact with the world and the way that you interact with other people. So you picked out some verses here about makeup and jewelry, and some that people use for tattoos. And it's interesting, the translation differences. But we'll go through them all, like Leviticus 19:28. It says, "You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead, or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord." So that's a pretty big one, because lots of Christians have or are getting tattoos right now. It's kind of a big deal, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
I didn't do a lot of research behind that, but I believe tattooing back then was something different. It wasn't a personal art form. It was more
A form of idolatry, maybe?
Yeah.
Like of worship?
yeah, it was a sign of idolatry more.
Mhm.
And then wasn't it earrings were more a sign of bond servanthood, slavery.
Yeah.
So they meant different things back then in the context in which they were. And so
The reason I think it's interesting, the translation issue, was when you look at, which translation did you use?
these are ESV.
ESV. What's interesting is that that Hebrew word can possibly mean tattoo, but when you look at any commentary, most commentators agree that what we're talking about is the tearing of their cheeks and other parts of their bodies with knives or nails. And they did it as a form of mourning for the dead, or as a sacrifice to the dead. I kind of looked through a lot of commentaries when I read that, because that's a particular interest to me, because I have tattoos.
Mhm.
I wanted to make sure that I had like kind of at least a right perspective on it. And I could find a commentator that even mentioned tattoos, actually. That seems to be purely a translation issue that was placed into the ESV to use that particular word. It can mean cutting, or it can mean tattooing. It can't mean both at the same time, though. You would have to use it separately.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't use like the Hebrew word and then it mean everything that it could possibly mean. That's not how
Right.
Hebrew
It
works.
was intentional.
So you have to pick one or the other. You can't just like exegete that and say, okay, well, it means all the things that I want it to mean. It's like you have to single it out. Like, if you need it to mean tattoo, or if it actually does mean tattoo, then you need to translate it as tattoo. But it can't mean cutting of the flesh and tattoo at the same time. It's got to be one or the other, or it has to be translated twice, or it has to be written twice.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't this also directly to the priest and the leadership?
Well, Leviticus was designed as it was written to the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood. But also there's a lot of Leviticus that is designed to be like general philosophy kind of ideals.
Okay.
But a lot of Leviticus is like how you build things, how you do sacrifices, you know, how you go about worship and things like that.
But then the argument comes into play that we no longer live under Levitical law.
Right.
We live under the law of grace. And
Well, and you're right. Yeah, that would be the exact thing. You know, it's when people choose to take a Levitical or any type of something from the original law and apply it to Christianity as if that is the way that we should live our lives, then you cannot take that piece without taking the whole.
Yeah.
You know, you have to.
I don't want the whole.
You have to observe the whole of the law if you take
Yeah.
a piece of the law, because that's the purpose of the law.
Right.
Although I can get behind, the monthly leaving of the camp for, leave the kids.
Bye.
Wait a minute.
I'll be
Time
back.
out.
I'll be back. I'll be out with the other women.
Yeah, and then when you get back, the tent's a mess, and the kids are off somewhere, and they don't know where they are. You know, it's like it probably wasn't a bed of roses. Actually,
I go back to, we live in the time of grace, and even though we have the ability, like 1 Corinthians says, all things are lawful to me, but not all things are expedient. Like, I shouldn't. Just because I can do something, maybe it's not the best for me or for people around me. And so you just have to kind of grapple with that with you and the Lord on what He thinks is best for you. Because I'm of a big belief that God He can use anything to be a testimony to Him. So, whereas like you may, you may get people to talk to you. We've been out several times and somebody says, "Hey, what's your tattoo say?" And that's a conversation starter right there. It's like, that's an open door where that conversation would not have happened if he didn't have a tattoo on his arm. Or like most of the time it's your hand. What is that?
yeah, people ask that all the time.
So, God can use anything. Now, whereas for someone like me, I have never felt the compelling to get one. I don't like pain. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the simple fact of the matter is that the New Testament is completely silent on the idea of whether tattoos are good or not. The only thing I've ever seen utilized to make an argument against them is the idea in Leviticus, and then also the one where know you not that your body is the temple of the living God. And then they'll say things like, well, you shouldn't mar up the temple, and I think you really have to be careful when you start taking and picking things that people do that you don't like, and then start trying to make a biblical argument against them, because the same people that would say that, well, don't you know that your body is the temple of the living God and you shouldn't corrupt it by doing X, Y, or Z? Those are the same people that are shoveling cheeseburgers in their mouth at an ungodly rate, or, not mistreating their bodies in other ways that they don't want to address, and so it's like when you begin to take scripture and apply it to someone because they do something that you don't like, that's the opposite of the way that scripture is supposed to work. Scripture is supposed to work so that you read something and then you internalize it, as opposed to you reading it and then putting it out there for someone to be punished because of their choices that they've made, or whatever the case may be. So, I think that what people have to do is they have to understand that if someone's doing something that you don't like, or that you don't understand, or that you don't appreciate, it's not your job to judge them based on that. You can judge them by their fruit. If they are not bearing fruit that is a natural progression of growth that demonstrates the fruit of the Spirit, then you can judge them based on that. But if a person is, let's just say a person is covered in tattoos and they're bearing spiritual fruit, it would be shameful for you to reproach them because of their tattoos.
Yes.
it would that would not be good. That would be an illustration of a heart issue that you have, as
Right.
opposed to them.
Well, I mean,
we have to
isn't
be-
it man that sees the outside and God sees the inside?
Well,
So
God-
you don't know
Mm-hmm.
that person for their heart and where it's at with God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's like most tattoos happen during a certain age bracket of time, and most people are not. Some people are not spiritually mature during that time. It's more of a this is what I want to do, and then they grow and mature. I mean, those tattoos are always there. I mean, you can cover them, and I guess you can get them removed, but so.
And I think that I got one tattoo when I was younger, and it was stupid,
Yes.
right? But I got my other tattoo when I was older and later in life. And I think what happens is that as you get older, you begin to realize that these things have to have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
When you're younger, you just do dumb things. You just like put stuff on your body because you think it's cool, right? But when I got my most recent tattoo, those things mean something to me. They have significance, and it'll be something that I can take to my grave. It'll be.
You will.
Exactly. It's that big of a deal to me. And so, I think that's kind of what people have to think about. If you are a believer and you're thinking about getting a tattoo, understand that it's going to be there forever, and that it needs to have significance. Like, you can't just do I don't know, like a SpongeBob or just some kind of nonsensical, character or idea.
Well, it's like you were saying yesterday, and oftentimes, whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord to glorify God in your body. So if your tattoo is somehow going to glorify God, bear fruit, then it has some justification. But if you're just messing around with your skin, maybe not so much.
Yeah. It gets that way too, because people can get addicted to that,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're just like putting stuff all over their body just because.
I think that goes back to the point that Ken was trying to make, is there's a deeper reason. It's like people do these things because of, I don't know if the euphoric nature of it. It's like with makeup, or it's like with cosmetic surgeries, or it's with all these things that we think are going to make us happy in the moment. You find that a person gets a tattoo and they're immediately thinking about the next tattoo they're going to get. Or a female goes and gets her face lifted and she goes, well, now this area, it's ever evolving because of something that's missing in here, something that's not necessarily fulfilling you. You're trying to find fulfillment in that thing.
Yeah. So I wanted to look it up because I wanted to kind of read it a little bit more. But the thing about tattoos is that they have always been with us since the dawn of time. Man has been marking his body with symbols and with decorations. I don't know that there's any culture that has ever existed that did not practice some sort of adornment like that, even if it was temporary. Like even Middle Eastern or even Eastern cultures, they had henna, and they would, they would paint their bodies with symbols and the way that they looked. Nordic traditions tattooed, Islander cultures tattooed, African cultures scarred. And probably the reason that they did scarring was because it actually showed up on their skin, because most of those people had really high melanin counts.
Would you think that would go back to what the Levitical law was saying, was marking your body for scarring purposes?
Well, that was a ritual. But what Leviticus is talking about is a ritual. Okay. It was a ritual for the dead. And it was cutting and that kind of thing. Kind of, I would equate it similar to what Elijah was experiencing when they were trying to summon their gods, and they were cutting their flesh and bleeding and all that kind of other kind of stuff. And Elijah was making fun of
self-flagellation kind of a thing.
Kind of similar to that, like where they're kind of, whipping themselves or whatever.
Well, I
But
think going back to what you were saying earlier, you said creativity. So, like, it's a creative expression these days. Like, to have a tattoo
Mhm.
is your way to kind of express yourself
yeah.
for some.
And some people people get really clever with those things. I know a guy. Well, there's a young man that used to come to the church here a lot. That he has diabetes, and he has his information about his diabetes tattooed on his arm in like this decorative kind of framework, so that wherever he goes,
If he
he's got
passes
all
out.
of his medical information on his arm.
Well, I read an article that might be a little off, but that a woman was identified, her body was identified in a dumpster because of her tattoos. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well,
There's my reason. I may end
Yeah.
up in a dumpster one day.
There's practical applications for them, just like anything else.
yes.
And people have used them for a myriad of things throughout the past. People might say, well, they used them in, whatever culture to serve and honor their gods. Well, yeah, they did that. Also, cultures, particularly like Viking cultures, would tattoo themselves just to look terrifying. So, there's all kinds of reasons that people did it. There's historical reasons, religious reasons, psychological reasons. There's all kinds of reasons that people have done it all throughout the ages. The bottom line is that it's always been with us. And as long as it's not something that brings reproach to God, I would say it's just like, what clothes are you wearing? You can't put something on your body that's going to bring reproach to God. And there are things that are like questionable. It's like, should we be celebrating that? Because things like, I don't know. I think of like skulls, like getting tattoos of skulls. That's really popular. And I've known some people who are Christians who have got some tattoos of skulls, and it's like, well, what's your reasoning behind the skull? Are we celebrating death, or are we celebrating the end of life? Are we celebrating the entropy of man, or like, what does that symbol mean?
Or you
right?
just bad to the bone.
Well, because iconography is a big deal, right? Icons mean something.
Yeah.
So, it's like, what are you trying to say? And I think that most people don't really think about it that deeply. I think people just think, oh, it'd be cool to have a skull with a dagger going through it and a rose wrapped around it. And so they're just like, bzzz, and then they have it for the rest of their life. And they don't think about the iconography. And then they get out and they're like hanging around with people, and they look at it and they say, wow, you got a skull on your arm? That's not something I would think that a Christian would have,
I often think about that. It's like people in their 20s, get these tattoos. And some of young people have, I've seen young people get verses tattooed. There's meaning behind that. But I also go, you are not the same person in your 20s that you are in your 30s and 40s and 50s. And I don't think you often think that I have to explain this to my children and then my grandchildren. And then you may not even be able to identify what your tattoo was in your 70s.
Yeah. If you get it,
like,
if you get your tattoo when you're like in your 20s, by the time you're in your 70s, it's not even going to be recognizable
like
anymore.
an ink blob.
Yeah. So here's my basic philosophy on young people with tattoos. You need to wait. Wait until you're 25, 30 years old. You've kind of gotten where you want to be, or going in the direction of where you want to be in life, and you've actually been able to think through philosophically what your life looks like. Because in your early 20s, you don't know anything. Like, you're just like getting stuff because it looks cool. And then you get down the road a little bit, you might realize, oh, that kind of needs to mean something.
I don't think they don't know. To be fair to the younger generation, they don't know what they don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you think in your 20s what you are, but understanding that your reasoning part of your brain is not even fully developed until you're 25, and that's not a hit on you. It's just that's natural. And so, like what you're saying, wait until you're fully matured in your mental capacities to make wise decisions.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, I just speak personally. I've got my tattoos when I was younger. Of the three, two I am perfectly fine with. One, I would probably say I would like to not have. It's a Taurus, which I was not a believer when I was younger. So to me,
Is that an
that did-
astrological sign?
Yes.
Okay.
which is a bull.
Okay.
And for me, not being with God was with the world. And that's how I was like, yeah, I'm a bull. I'm tough. I'm stubborn. Look at me. And I now reflect on that like,
Yeah.
that's because I was listening to what the world said I was. And
Yeah.
to me, I do not think that way. That's only when I'm like, I wish I probably didn't have it.
So
But-
do you
But,
think the military culture, were you in the military when you got
Oh,
all those?
Yeah. Well, no, my first one was even before I went to the military.
Okay.
But see, on the other side of that, there's no sense in living in regret. That actually brings up the ability to have an interesting conversation.
Oh, for sure.
About, I got this when I was younger. Yeah, I kind of wish I wouldn't have it, but here's the reason I did get it, and
Yes.
here's the reason I don't believe that anymore.
Well,
and
I
so,
look at it as that was the old me, and that's where I can speak into that is these are the decisions I made. This is where I was led
yeah,
by the world, and that's what I was seeking. And so that's where I'm like, okay, I don't second guess it. I don't regret it, but if I could change it, I would change it.
yeah,
But like you were saying, being a younger mindset, but I was in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
That's what you did.
I am I'm the U.S. military. So it was like, okay, yeah, I'm young, but give me a rifle,
Yeah.
I can get a tattoo. So, and also peers around me having tattoos as well. I think
yeah.
really
It's part of
drove
the
into
warrior
that.
culture.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
to me, I don't like pain either. And I think like for those who are kind of on that decision front is just be wise. If it's pain, if you don't like pain, you might not want to do it. If you don't have funds for it, you don't want to be
Yeah.
spending your money doing this.
It's expensive.
definitely a waste
Because
of money.
if
yeah,
you get it when you're young and you regret it, it's going to be just as more expensive and more painful to get it removed.
And
Yeah.
like it takes like 11
Or
or 12
covered.
sessions to get those things removed.
Yeah,
The
so
laser.
there's that thought process. If you're like, you know what, those are two things off the table. I'm not going to do it.
Mm.
And then having something, is it meaningful? Is it something, you'll see people have in memory of, of their parents or their child, that has meaning to
Yeah.
them.
My brother has the first names of all his kids on his arm.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. It's like mine is a bull. I have a bull, but mine is the crest of the Clan MacLeod, which is my mom's maiden name.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of my Scottish roots.
Yeah.
And so it has special significance to me. Now, if you would have asked me in my early 20s if that meant anything to me, probably not. But as I've gotten older, I really have come to appreciate, where I have come from and where my roots are at. And so I honor that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a really cool story. The story of how we got our crest and the name or the slogan that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of different ones that we have. We have another one that has Latin on it. It says, "I burn because I am." And it has to do with, interestingly enough, it is an absolutely Christian idea. They burn with passion because of who they are, because of the spirit that dwells within them.
Mm-hmm.
And that developed later on. And so there's a lot of things that you can do with that can bring some really great ideas and that have special significance to you. But I just think that you need to hold on until you've kind of discovered those things
Mm-hmm.
that are.
There's also the idea of job market. If
Yes.
you
Mhm.
are, you may say jobs are not going to discriminate towards that, but they do. If you're like fully face tat or all the way down to your fingers, is if you are going to do something like that, make sure it's something that can be covered.
I
That
often
way
think
it's
about,
not exposed.
like, those people that get the gauges and they spread their earlobes.
Mhm.
I go, at some point, possibly, you're going to maybe do away with that. And the only way to get your earlobe to close back is to remove all that skin.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like-
you can't go back from that.
So, and a lot of companies require you to take your gauges out or to plug them. It's like
Yeah.
it's things like that. And I know even in the theater, doing theater, the amount of time people had to make up their tattoos to just go on stage because you're playing a different role. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. I mean, you have to be wise. You want it to be somewhere where you can display it if you want to.
Mhm.
I'm not a big proponent of these like super like oddly located like tattoos, like
Weirdly
trans stamps, or
placed.
it's on your rear end, or it's like I'm gonna get a moth on my right breast or something, or whatever. It's like those just seem odd to me because it's like what are you gonna do with that?
Well,
I mean,
it's
it's
just
not
for
like
that person.
exactly.
Well, might just
Yeah.
have the tattoo artist in a certain spot. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be
Oh.
weird.
Yeah.
And so I think you just have to think about location. We have to be practical.
Location.
You have to be practical, like you said, and face tattoos are just generally a bad idea.
But
and-
how do you speak to someone who is a non-believer and they feel that they cannot come through the doors because they are tattooed up?
I would say to them that it's unfortunate that you feel that way.
Mhm.
You certainly shouldn't feel that way here. And I think that having people in the church that represent that helps them to feel a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
I think that I'm not saying that you should get a tattoo to be relevant to tattoo people,
Yeah.
but I do know that I have talked to people that are tattooed that came to our church and they saw me on stage and they saw my forearm and they saw my tattoo and they immediately felt at ease. Immediately.
Mhm.
Just seeing it made them feel at ease. Now there will be portions of people that will see that and they will get, they'll get turned off by it and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't want to be a part of that,"
Right.
And that's fair enough. Fair enough. To each their own. But you're not going to make all the people happy, but it's great when you can get someone who may not feel welcomed at other places can come in and feel welcome.
And that's what I go back to. It's like God can use anything. He's going to use anything. He can use your tattoos. And so.
Well, this might be a good place to pivot and look at a couple of the positive verses. I mean, the Bible is not totally down on
Ooh.
jewelry, tattoos, and makeup.
I know
There are
he
some
likes
positive
jewelry.
ones.
Especially earrings.
Do you like earrings?
A little bit.
Yeah. So let's see. Positive verses. Which one were you? Genesis chapter 24, verses 21 through 23. The man, Isaac's servant, gazed at her, who was
Oh,
Rebekah,
yes.
in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms, weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" I mean, what does that say? That says that even in the searching out for Rebecca, she was considered to be, it was not considered taboo to give her a ring and some bracelets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know. I think you could argue as to whether or not that was for her or it was for her father.
True.
Yeah.
I
It
don't
may
care.
have been.
She didn't care, probably.
It may have been payment.
May have been a bribe.
It may have been payment. It may have been a dowry,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So there's something to think about there.
The next one's a little.
A
little
woman
more
doesn't
pointed.
care. If
Yeah.
she gets bracelets, she's
Right.
got bracelets.
Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 9 through 12. Then I, God, bathed you, Jerusalem, with water and washed off your blood from you and anointed you with oil. I clothed you also with the embroidered cloth, and shod you with fine leather. I wrapped you in fine linen, and covered you with silk. And I adorned you with ornaments, and put bracelets on your wrists, and a chain on your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, and a ring and earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head.
Nice.
There you go.
So there's God's adorning his.
With a septum ring, no less.
You watched that yesterday. You watched somebody getting a nose piercing.
Oh man, it was horrifying.
But that's
Pain.
painful.
I can't even imagine. Like, she was crying as she was doing it. There's this tool that they put into their nose, and they push their nostrils to the side. It has these barrels on either side, and then it squeezes onto their septum. And then he takes this large needle and just pushes it through her septum, and then replaces that with the ring, screws little posts on the end of it, and then squeezes it together.
Ouch.
And I'm just thinking to myself, why?
I actually think little nose, I don't necessarily like the rings, but I think the little nose jewels are cute. I would never do it because I mess with my nose way too much. Like, I rub my nose really, but I think they're
Yeah.
kind of cute.
I pick my nose way too much to have a nose ring.
I know. I have a few friends that have those, and they just talk about it constantly. Feels like there's a crusty
Yeah.
in their nose, and I'm like, why would you want to feel that all the time?
I couldn't do that. That would drive me crazy.
But
That is cute.
You know, was talking to Richard about this in piercing and tattoos. Is, to me, coming at the place of where I was and when I was getting tattoos was an expression of pain. So could I then inflict pain and therefore feel a release? And that's, to me, when I see people, and that's not saying everybody's this way, but when I see that, I see pain in these
that's interesting.
individuals. Is, tell me your life. What is your story? Because to me, there's always a reason why we express the things we do.
Are you talking about people who have like an excessive amount of piercings?
Well, yeah, and maybe less. Is everybody has their reason of why they do.
I mean,
and
most
decide to
women
do
have
things.
pierced ears. I don't think I would think of them
No.
as having like pain in their lives because they have earrings.
No, I would think more the excessive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right, because it seems to me like if you have a lot of that, like especially with like a lot of the body modification stuff where they're putting horns in their heads and they're elevating their cheeks and they're doing all this kind of
Vampire teeth.
stuff to make themselves look like something that they're not, you know.
They don't want to be approached.
Yeah. Well, either that or they're not happy with the person that they are, or they are they have a delusional desire to be something that they're not.
Right. And I'm not saying that's everybody.
Mhm.
That's just my own personal
Yeah.
experience. Is like, I want to know your story. So that actually makes me want to know them more
Yeah.
of, you know.
Well, some people just have conditions. Like,
Mm.
there's this guy in Europe who is fascinated with aliens. And so he has tattooed his body and gotten body modifications over time to make himself look like an alien. He's raised his eyebrows. He's tattooed his eyes black. So his eyes are
You
completely
can
black.
tattoo your eyes.
Apparently, yeah. He's tattooed his eyes black.
His eyeballs?
His eyeballs, yeah. His whole body is covered in like scaly looking tattoos. His head, he has no hair. And his head is kind of shaped to look like a gray alien almost. And he even had 2 fingers on each hand removed. So he would
Oh.
only have 3 fingers on each hand.
Now, that's
The
See,
delusion.
okay.
That's something different.
That is something different. But I will say that there was a time in culture where this was on the news. Like, remember stilettos and we used to call them cockroach killer.
Oh.
What do they call those?
Yes.
Yes, like heels that they were so pointy
Mhm.
that women were having their pinky toe removed so they could wear their heels.
That seems disturbing.
And I'm like, wow, that's commitment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting the things that people will do in the name of fashion. You know, I mean, if you
Yeah.
think about just like, you know, some Eastern countries would do the foot wrapping,
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they would do it to the point where they would wrap their feet to the point where they would be malformed and could barely walk anymore.
Mhm.
And
Or
which
those
is
people-
that tribe in Africa where they
Yeah,
stack
their
the
necks.
rings?
Stack the
Yeah,
rings
to
on their necks.
elongate their necks. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
I mean, it
horrible.
would get to the point where you take the rings off and your head just go bloop.
Well, it
Yeah.
kind of goes back to that, just like, so my personal story of like, where you just see that it's ever evolving, like you trying to find fulfillment in this thing that's not fulfilling. We went to Mexico one time, and my sister-in-law and my stepmom, we decided to get eyelash extensions, or eyelashes, because they're cheaper in Mexico. And so I was like, sure, that'll be fun. I've never done that before. Let's do it. And it literally took an hour and I to get these eyelashes put on. And I loved them. They were beautiful. Like, you didn't have to put mascara on every morning. And they were just like, oh. But as I'm too cheap to get them filled here in the States. So I was like, well, they're just going to start to fall out. That's fine. And when they fell out and then I looked at myself in the mirror, I was like, is that what I look like? Normally. Well, they do mess up your eyelashes too. So my eyelashes were, and I was like, oh, maybe I do need to go get those redone. And then I had the thought, I was like, oh my gosh, I can see how people
Mhm.
like they get some lip filler to make their lips fuller, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not lasting. And when you look in your mirror and it starts to go away, you think you have to have that to fulfill and to think you're
Yeah.
pretty. Or
Have you ever seen that series? I don't know if it's on anymore. Botched.
Oh, yes.
And
Oh,
that
like
kind of shows that to the extreme.
bad cosmetic surgeries. Oh,
Where they've had one after another for years and
Uh-huh.
years. Kind of the Michael Jackson syndrome. They
Mhm.
continue to find some critical part of themselves that they want to be enhanced.
yeah.
And it keeps going and going and going until they become a caricature of themselves. And then these plastic surgeons try to reverse that or give
Oh.
them some kind of normality or get rid of the health problems that it's
Mm.
causing in their
Yeah.
bodies.
But
Well-
you notice all them people that get the plastic surgeries, once they get to a certain point, they all look the same.
Mhm.
Haven't you ever noticed that? Like, it's like, oh,
Yeah,
they've had surgery and they kind of look like everyone else who's
they
had
all
the
have
surgery.
the same features, the big
Well, it
lips.
seems like that's
and
kind of the
yeah.
cultural influence, right? You know, high cheekbones,
Yep.
big eyes, whatever. that
Full lips.
we've made to be the ideal,
Mm-hmm.
and people chase after that, so they wind up all looking the same. They're chasing the same ideal.
And
Well,
when
it's
they get,
interesting you talk about that, because if we understand that we're made in the image of God, which is perfect, why are we then chasing after what men think,
Exactly.
what the world thinks, what looks perfect and beautiful?
what I
That's kind
always,
of where I got back to the spiritual maturity. If
Yeah.
we truly believe that, to the bottom of our souls, God
Mhm.
made me exactly the way he wanted me, warts and all,
Yeah.
then I should be happy with that, rejoice in that, celebrate that, and have no desires to enhance that for my own satisfaction or to impress others.
Yeah.
yeah.
It really is like, just kind of with piercings in general, it really is kind of a cultural thing. Like, if you look through the New Testament, and you try and kind of delineate, what does the Bible say about, things like plating of gold and things like that. And usually that ends up being in Ephesians. And the reason that it's in Ephesians is because of the goddess that they worshipped in Ephesus. And there was a lot of harlotry. There was a lot of prostitution. And the prostitutes would doll themselves up to make themselves look more sexually attractive. And so the mandate to the Ephesians was, it's like, well, let's not do that thing, because then you just look like the rest of them that are out there. Let's do something different. And I think what it boils down to with like jewelry and things of that nature is like, you don't want to ever get to a place where you identify with the world by the jewelry that you wear. If it's accentuating, kind of the style that you want to pursue as a what would you say, like an artistic endeavor or whatever, then maybe that's one thing. But then when you start just pursuing it for the sake of pursuing it so that you can look more like the people of the world, then that's probably when you start having an issue with things like
But that's
that.
such a subjective thing.
Mhm.
Everyone
It is, and
draws
it's going
the
to be
line
different
differently.
wherever you're at.
Right.
Because a person in Africa, it's going to be a lot different. Then
Africa, even in our own country, we had some friends that, sorry to interrupt, some friends that they ministered in Pennsylvania, and she was in Florida and we were shopping, and I said, look at this top, it's so cute. And it was very modest, but it was very bright and bold. And she was like, oh, I probably shouldn't wear that, because the people they were ministering to were like Mennonite. Like she's like, I wouldn't wear it. They would totally, like, even culturally in our own country. And that's what it is. It's like always looking outward. Like, yeah, I might be okay with this, but is it expedient for me and the people around me?
It's hard to make a biblical argument against jewelry in general, because, God adorns Israel with jewelry. Jewelry was brought to Rebecca. It's like
he made the jewels.
Jewelry was a part of the priesthood. The priesthood, the priests themselves were adorned with jewels. And so, it's just a part of what we do as far as expressing who we are as people, or as an office, or as individuals. And so, it's hard to make a biblical argument against it. However, I think that it's just kind of like tattoos. It's like you got to be practical in its application. You don't ever want to put yourself in a position to where you're drawing undue attention to that particular part of yourself, and away from God. If it's like to the point where people can't hear what you're saying about the gospel because your face is covered with hardware, that might be an issue. I'm not saying that it is an issue, but it could be. If you are trying to talk about the gospel and people can't get past the tattoos on your face, that could be an issue. It's not necessarily that it is, but it could be. So it's something to think about. I do know some believers that have face tattoos, and they are very outspoken about their faith and that type of thing. And I think that there's always going to be for them, they're going to always have to have that conversation about their face tattoos, whether they're giving the gospel or whether they're, whatever, right? There's always going to be the conversation about your face tattoos. You're just going to have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And if you have your face covered in tattoo or in piercings, you're just going to have to be prepared that every conversation you have is going to be about your piercings.
Right.
Every single one of them. You just have to be ready for that.
It's also asking yourself, who is your audience? From what you're wearing, from what jewelry you're putting on, to what tattoo you're doing, who is your audience? What's your purpose in it? Because yes, there is a balance. Yes, jewelry's fine, but if it's excessive to the point where you're flaunting or showboating, then that
if you're ministering to the poor and you're wearing your pearls and your diamond rings on every hand, it might not come across as
right.
Or let's look at the other side of that, like you were talking yesterday about modesty and chastity.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of misguided messages being sent out in our young people that are causing problems.
Okay, so this is not a biblical example, but I was watching something years ago, and this was kind of when, well, anyway, Kathy Lee Gifford was talking about, she was like, man, men, back in the day, you could go to a bar and a man would see a woman and he'd be like, hey, and they'd go home and, typical, let's have, sleep together. And he says, but nowadays, boy, these men, they're taking these women home and the boob fillers are coming out and the butt fillers are coming out and the eyelashes are coming off, the extensions there. And by the time he looks at the woman that he took home, she's completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's even talked about today. There's a video out there of this guy. He gets on a roller coaster with this really attractive woman, right? And the roller coaster starts going, and as they're going, like, stuff is falling off of her face. And then when they get back to the end of the roller coaster, it's like this dude with a beard. And like he's like,
I saw that one. I was like, oh no.
Oh no. The people in the back have the eyelashes stuck to their face.
Well, I had listened to a podcast, and it was a group of women, and they were talking about this in the sense of dress. And you had touched on it yesterday about the modesty. Is in our culture, and I'm not saying all men, but men typically are attracted to women that are exposing themselves. And it was like, hey, men, just do better. Champion those that are modest and are doing and presenting themselves the way they should. And bringing up a young girl myself, my daughter, is having her understand, yes, the culture may be pushing this, but that's what, how do I word this? You don't want to chase that and think that that's what you need to then do.
It's complicated.
It is complicated.
It's really complicated especially for young people that are searching for a mate.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, if you think about it from a biological level, or even a psychological level, God's designed us in such a way that we are visually attracted to certain traits. And those traits typically have to do with child rearing. I know that sounds, it sounds terrible, but if you think about it, men are attracted typically to breasts, and they're typically attracted to hips. And the reason that is because those things demonstrate a woman's ability to be able to have birth. Now, most men don't know that that's the reason that they're attracted to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Most men just are attracted to those things. And so from a biological standpoint, if you are a girl that's looking for a mate, a suitable mate, that's a really difficult line to draw, because you want to make yourself in such a way that you're attractive enough that you attract the attention of a suitable male. But you also have this kind of moral ethos that determines, or that states that, well, I don't want to be promiscuous. So how do I make myself attractive to a suitable male and still be able to be modest in my appearance?
Right.
And I think that can be achieved. It's just, it doesn't get talked about enough. Like, what does a beautiful woman look like? And how do you accentuate that in such a way that makes her attractive? And part of it, like what you're saying, is right. Men need to be better at magnifying, good modesty. But also there is a modesty that is not good. It's ugly. It's just not good. And when you get to that extreme, it's like that's not the way that God's designed the brain. And that's not the way that God's designed us to look and to see one another. This guy that was looking for for a bride, and he saw Rebecca.
He just saw her.
He saw her, and he was like, yeah, she's a knockout, right? And so, and when she came back, the name Isaac, thank you. The name was escaping me for some reason. When she arrived, he lit off his camel. I mean, he like jumped off his camel, running over there, like, wow.
I wonder if he was worried. Like, I sure hope he picks a good one.
He was probably just showing how agile he was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. These are all just visual cues, right? Yeah.
I just got a visual of Richard jumping off the with rings of gold.
That's a terrifying thought.
In his britches.
And women are on the other side of that. There are cues that men have that are that signal that you are a suitable mate. And that's just natural. It's just built into us, and we can't just dismiss that, because it is part of who we are.
True.
But you also have to be able to dress in such a way, if you are a young lady that is looking for a suitable mate, you need to be able to dress in such a way that is attractive yet is still modest. That's the hard part, and that's the part that's not taught.
Well, I definitely feel that I was blessed with wise women in my life growing up, and one of the tips that I try to talk to Shelby about, like women, let's just be honest, women don't dress for men. They dress for other women. And that's not saying that we're trying to attract other women. It's just that women have the emotional expression of what they wear, and they then respond to other women saying, "Wow, I love that blouse. That's beautiful."
Mhm.
Man, I don't think men
Is
really.
it that or is it
I-
competition?
No,
I-
I don't know.
I would
don't know,
argue.
but
I
it's-
would argue that I would say that
Sometimes.
on a subconscious level, women's fashion is dictated by your deep inset psychological positioning wherever you are in life.
Mm.
I think that that's true. If you look at
Both the
Y'all think
women-
about this way deeper than I do.
no, it's just
I'm like,
that's,
that's cute.
like
that's
with
well
guys.
Yeah,
that's well
that's just
established
adorable.
psychology. That's
Yeah.
not even debatable.
Okay. Well,
So it's
It's like you walk into a room of men and women. Everybody's dressed the same except there's one guy. He's got on the tailored suit, and he's just ready.
Richard.
He is the leader. Every man in the room is going to look at him and think there's something superior about him. I think the
Mm.
women do the same thing. The woman walks in with a designer dress. The other
Mm.
women are underdressed. They immediately look at her like, okay, she's the alpha woman. In
I
the
don't
room.
I don't know that there's a lot of the alpha woman thing going on because I don't think women are constructed in that way. But there is a level of competition, especially if you're a younger girl.
Hmm.
Like if you are in your teens, to say that there is not a competition among the attention seeking among teenage girls
Well, that's just
would
the
be
invisible
nonsensical.
audience.
Yeah, and so if you go to any high school, most of the teenage girls will be dressed similarly, but they will all be trying to stand out
Yeah.
in some way as to attract whatever it is they're
I'll
trying to
never
attract.
forget when we were at Disney this last time. And
Mm.
this goes to show the difference between men and women, because what I think my boys would struggle with, they were like, "Mom, that's not even."
Mhm.
And I'm going, "Really?" And the boys, actually, the girls that I thought my boys would be, or the girls that my boys would be attracted to, they were like, "No."
Put off by it.
Yeah, because we were at Disney World and it was a cheerleading competition time, so there were all these cheerleaders, and I'm not joking you, they were all dressed the same. Like
to
they
a to a girl.
they
yeah.
they had shorts, tank tops, and they were all the same fabrics. I mean, there was a standard, and it wasn't their uniform because they all had a little variation. The copy and
Copy and
paste.
paste,
Okay.
yes.
And so I'm looking and I'm going, well, all these girls are just cute and they're, being a little bit revealing. And my boys were so off put by it. He was like, they all look the same. It's just,
Mhm.
and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, that goes to just because everybody else is doing it doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're as a young lady, be confident enough in yourself that you do not have to be a part of the group.
Well,
and
and-
like speaking with Shelby, is when she wears a pretty dress, I don't say that dress is beautiful. I say you make that dress beautiful because
Yeah.
the dress doesn't make her beautiful.
Yeah.
She is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I would want moms to speak into daughters
Yeah.
is don't have them chase material things to make themselves worthy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it also speaks to what you were talking about earlier, because girls do dress for each other.
They do.
And that's the reason that they all looked the same. But the overall theming was, I'm going to attract the attention of a male. That
Mhm.
was the overall theming.
Is that where the competitiveness
And that's
comes?
where the competitiveness comes from.
I can, yeah. I
And
can-
that's natural. That's just the way that we're designed psychologically.
But
Well,
I
yeah, we
also,
were
go ahead.
created in the garden naked.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Go
Yeah.
figure.
Yeah.
And then the fig leaves came out. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's because man tried to make the fig leaf,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
God's like,
If
let
a
me
woman
dress
would have
you.
made it.
Let
It would have
me
been a
dress
knockout.
All
right?
I'm saying is that I don't think that Christians have enough conversations about sex and sexuality, and how that applies to their children in general.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of desire, and rightly so. I mean, I think that a lot of parents would just rather their kids never be exposed to it. But also that same, like, just say, for instance, a young man, right? You got a young man that's growing up. You want to keep him away from the internet. You want to keep him away from other girls. You want to keep him away from all the things that influence him to to be sexually stimulated, let's say. And, you know, you do all these things, right? But what you don't realize is that in the subconscious of that boy, it doesn't matter whether there's anything around or not. He's going to create fantasies to put into the place of where he might visualize a fantasy. So you have to have that conversation. You have to have the conversation of like, what does sex look like in the relationship of a believer, and how do we make that a conversation that is godly? And just because it's about sex doesn't mean that it's ungodly, because God created it. He created it for a very specific reason. And so
that same is happening for young ladies. I mean, I can remember at a very young age when I would go out and play make believe. It was always house. I always had a husband, or my favorite was I had a pretend boyfriend named Johnny, and my name was Lisa. You know, it's that subconscious, like that's, you know, even as a young
kind of a
kid.
conditioning.
Well, it's just kids
I don't know.
playing out roles that they see. That's natural. Kids will always play out the roles that they see their parents playing out, or that they see modeled on television. And which is one of the reasons why the modeling of fathers and adult men on TV has been detrimental to masculinity. And it all started with the likes of like Al Bundy. You know, this thought that a man is some beer swilling fat slob that doesn't care about his family. It's just an obnoxious thought, and it has permeated our culture. And as much as the vanity that has permeated our culture from, you know, the TikTok revolution, and people seeking self-satisfaction.
I was just thinking back into the 70s, some of the sitcoms, that the bumbling idiot man was the unique character in that scenario. And then you started seeing more of them pop up. And so it's almost like Hollywood kind of grabbed that and ran with it to where now it's gone to the extreme. And society's adopted that and stereotyped men as, well, they all fit into this same mold. Give a man long enough and he'll look like an idiot.
Right?
Give him a long enough rope, he'll hang himself.
But I think getting back to kind of like what we were talking about, I think that we as parents need to be able to equip our kids to navigate the complicated sexual dialogue that's happening after puberty.
Well, you should ask our kids.
It's complex.
Valentine's, month of February, we have this talk of love, and the kids, we conversate about absolutes. Like right now, the stage that they're at, what are their absolutes? What do they notice? What do they find that they like? And it's been interesting to see, like,
that's an interesting idea.
From a 10-year-old's perspective to a 14-year-old's perspective. And, it's my oldest is, makeup's fine as long as it's not excessive and it's not like a paint job. And then my youngest young boy, 10, is absolutely not. I don't like makeup. And is that because I don't wear makeup and that's what he sees, versus a teenager who is now at that point where he's seeing things that he's finding out what his absolutes are.
I would argue unless his ideologies are concreted in by the time he hits puberty, he will change his mind. And the reason that he will change his mind about makeup in particular is that makeup is designed in such a way that it accentuates the natural flush of sexual arousal. That's the whole point behind makeup. From the beginning. Now, that's not the way that people utilize it in today's society, obviously. But when people do like heavy rouge and really red painted lips and, the really like colored eyes and all of that, It's exactly what Scripture talks about, and you won't find any positive scriptures about makeup.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
They're not there.
Look, this might be a good movie to reference, but The Hunger Games,
Mm.
when they go to the big city
Oh,
and
yeah.
the characters are full on makeup, and Shelby was just like, "Mom, it's
Yeah.
like caked on."
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like they put the white on. It was weird because they put the white
'Cause
on,
they
then
do
they put the
close-ups of
Yeah.
scenes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
you could see
Well,
the pores.
Neither one of our boys is really attracted to heavy makeup. Like that's something that girls have been lied to about, I think. In fact, I don't think I know of any guys or have ever met any guys that are like really like, oh man, her makeup is beautiful. Right?
But why is young women and even older women get to a point when it's excessive that they feel that that's the only way they can go out and feel normal?
I think when it's excessive, it's a self-worth issue. I think that they feel like they have to try to make themselves look like something that they're not because they're not actually happy with who they are. And there's a difference between like a person who masks themselves and a person who accentuates their color,
Mm-hmm.
right? Say, for instance, that there's a big difference between that. Like most people that would see Kim, like if you were to see her on the street, you may not even realize that she's wearing makeup
Right. Yeah.
because it's not like super red cheeks and, like the contouring and, like all that
Then
kind
I
of
did
stuff.
it good.
And so,
It's natural.
there's a difference between like accentuating the colors that you have and trying to make yourself, look fresh. This is like culturally part of who we are.
right.
But I will say, because I've worn makeup, since high school, when I don't have it on, I'm going, oh, well, maybe we need to go put a little paint on. I mean, there are times that I do that. And then as I'm aging, my pores are changing. And like I'm going, I need to find makeup that doesn't get into the pores. And so
I think that's why we start to lose our sight.
Yeah.
Because then we don't
That's a
see it.
great point. Yeah. Oh, I need readers. Why do I need readers?
You don't
Well,
wanna
you're getting
see-
older, So
But I
Here's
don't. Oh, go ahead.
Here's an interesting question. What makes drag queens attractive and to whom?
Nothing.
they're
Sorry.
attractive to themselves
Yeah.
only.
I think it's a delusion. I think that it kind of goes
It's a
back to,
character.
well, it goes back to what we women think is attractive. So like
Mhm.
like the things that I would think are attractive to a man, when you talk to a man, then they go, no, that's not really attractive. And we're going, wow, I didn't know anything.
Mhm.
I should probably talk to a man. And I think that man who's dressing up to be a woman, he's doing the same thing. He's lying. It's a
Mhm.
delusion. Like
He's got
I
a
think
personification of what he thinks the feminine
Women,
should
yeah.
look like.
And so they exaggerate those traits
Yep.
to the extreme.
well, they have to cover up so much because they're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that they can complete their delusion in their own mind. So that they can say, well, I am actually a woman. Look at me in the mirror. Look how I look like a
There's
woman.
no doubt.
But there's
When in reality,
when
it's
are the women looking like that?
no, they're not. It's just that's them telling themselves that this caricature of a woman is what a woman looks like. When in reality, it's probably offensive to most women that they think that that's what a woman looks
When we
like.
watch those videos of Dylan Mulvaney and his personification of what a woman is, and he's just
Or
like
acts like.
or acts like, I'm going,
Mhm.
does he really think women are that shallow? Like,
Mhm.
I mean, oh, I gotta do this, and I don't like. I just
Mm-hmm.
really want to hit him. I'm like, that is not what women. I mean, I don't know what women you're around,
Right.
Yeah.
but
Well, that's his personification of what
Yeah.
he thinks that a woman should be like. He's obviously never been to Athol because I don't know of any women around here that act that way. In fact, if he were to come here and act like that, he might get stomped in the face by a woman.
Wearing
Wearing-
a flannel shirt.
Hmm.
In camo.
Yeah. I mean, it's likely. So, I don't know where he got that idea. I think it's got something to do with media. It's probably got
Maybe.
something to do with, perceptions and, maybe pornography, a lot of unrealistic ideas.
You know what? I just realized what I'm flabbergasted with is I joined the Marine Corps and still was not a big makeup. And they had pulled us aside in boot camp to teach us how to do makeup. Granted, it was to the regulations that were allowed for the military. But to me, I was like, I don't want to wear makeup, but I still had to do this class.
Well, did they force you to wear makeup?
No.
Like on a yeah.
So
See,
if
so
you
that was
wanted
just
to.
establishing a universal standard.
Yes,
is what that was.
But to me, I'm like, oh, because I'm a female, I have to wear makeup? Like,
That was
why?
something you really didn't expect to find. There.
No,
Yeah.
I was just shocked. I
I
was
mean-
like, why are we doing this? Because if you think about it, in the military, as a female, one, we're joining a brotherhood, and you're wearing the same uniform that men are wearing. You want that uniformity, but then to pull us aside and say, well, here's makeup to make you different.
right.
Mhm.
And even to think about, I'm in this program in a sense to be all one uniform, but yet me as a female, I'm still different.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that it's not necessary, and it does kind of break the continuity.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like probably the reason they did that was because they knew that women would wear makeup, and they had to establish a universal standard so that if you're going to wear makeup, this is how you will do it.
Right. But here's the
Yeah.
thing, though, to think about female, male. We're all in the same uniform. We're all supposedly doing the same thing, but there's still men that are attracted to female military, even though you're all dressed the same. So nothing set us apart other than we were male and female.
It's because from a man's perspective, it has nothing to do with any of that.
Right.
From a psychological, subconscious level, a woman like that looks capable. And if you are a alpha male personality,
Mhm.
and you need someone to match your energy, that's going to be extremely attractive to you. You're going to be like, yep, that's the woman that can raise my children, which is what every man is thinking, whether they want to admit it or not.
Right. So with that, it wasn't the way I was dressed. It wasn't the makeup I was wearing. It wasn't the jewelry. It was that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way it's always going to be. Men, whether it doesn't matter how pretty or how sexy or whatever that you make yourself out to be. Maybe this is something for the young ladies to think about out there. Men who are looking for suitable mates are never going to select a girl based solely on their appearance. It's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
They will look at them, and if they look like capable child rearers, that's what they will pick.
Yeah.
Because subconsciously they don't have a choice. That's how they're driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when our boys are picking out, the girls that they want to be with, you can see it playing out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they don't really care if you're dolled up or not. That's not a thing to them. And most guys are like that.
I can't remember who said it and exactly how they said it, but it was like the woman that he wants to take out on Saturday night is not the one he wants to marry on Monday.
Yeah, maybe.
They're two different women. He wants the bad girl on Saturday night, but he wants the straight-laced church girl as his wife.
He wants a person that's going to be able to raise his children.
Yeah.
That's what he's looking
Going
for.
to be pure. She's not going to challenge him.
And women would call that a double standard, gentlemen.
Yeah, that absolutely is.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. But the sad thing of it is that women that think that being attractive like that is what men are looking for, they put themselves into the trap of being in the position of the harlot, used for their beauty, and not desired for their quality. And then they just become a tool, and that's sad. You don't ever want to be in that position. And guys shouldn't be putting themselves in a position to where they're doing that to someone. That's something to think about when you think about pornography.
Mhm.
You know, that's one of the things that changed the way that I think about pornography, is that when a woman does herself up to make herself attractive in that way, she's turning herself into a tool for his selfish gratification. And that's all that she is. That's all she'll ever be.
Mhm.
And that's devastating,
Mhm.
you know, and it's sad. And you couple that with like human trafficking and things like that. It's like it'll start to quickly change your mind.
Well,
about
there goes the conversation of what we have with our boys is, yes, you want to be attracted to the girl that you're dating or the potential wife that you may have. You want to be
It
attracted.
kind of
but
starts with that.
yes,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but
For
you don't
sure.
want to be chasing the way their apparel is, and they're seeking attention. Like if that individual is seeking attention, and say our young men do go to the military, what are their wives who have been seeking attention going to do when they're deployed?
Yeah.
They're going to need attention.
Yeah.
So it's just having those conversations of what is the character of your potential spouse? What are they trying to get from you, and what is it that you are seeing in them?
Yeah. And I think it's a forced trait. Like if a guy is looking for specifically like for this knockdown, drag out, beautiful girl, right? That's a forced trait. He's looking for that because he thinks that he should be looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going on in his head is not that. That's not what he's thinking. What he's thinking is this woman going to be the person that can raise my children?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's thinking.
Make
And-
me a sandwich.
and-
Teasing. Teasing.
and if that's the reason that a lot of marriages end in divorce, probably too, is because they fall into lust as opposed to fall into love.
Right.
And then they realize, wow, this woman, I don't want her raising my children.
Mm-hmm.
She's a nagging, crazy person. You know, I don't want that for my children. And so they back off and they cheat or they do whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know,
Or as we tease, trade her in for a newer model.
yeah. But I think that parents can have this conversation with their kids, and it can be something that's just part of the dialogue. It doesn't have to be taboo.
Mm-hmm.
It can be
Mhm.
something that's part of the general dialogue in a godly way, and be promoted as such. Because the truth of it is, it's a fact of life.
Mm-hmm.
This might be a good place to kind of pull us together into a summary, and also to address those women who are maybe hearing this podcast who were brought up in a branch of faith to where that was absolutely taboo, and that said a lot more about you than just the way you wanted to look.
Yeah.
It was an expression of your faith. It was an expression of your devotion, that you needed to dress this way. Absolutely no makeup, no dancing, no music, no bubblegum, whatever, right?
Don't cut your hair.
And they're still dealing with that to this day. And like you're talking, now they're raising their sons and daughters, and they're confused. How do I have that conversation? How should I frame this? What is the truth from God's word, and what should I take away and pass on to the next generation so they don't fall into the same trap that I did?
Well, I mean, I think what is taught in Titus is probably some of the best advice that you can have.
Mhm.
You want them to be discreet, and you want them to be chaste. And that's the lesson that you need to learn. And modesty is definitely in the eye of the beholder, but also the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to play the role accidentally of the harlot. And understanding what guys are looking for genuinely will help you a long way in understanding what modesty looks like, because guys will look at your physical appearance. They will, and they will look at your face, and there will be something that they're attracted to or something that they're not attracted to or whatever. But the bottom line is that if you accentuate your sexual person, your sexual parts, then that's what they will see. That's all they will see. and they won't see any of your quality. They won't see any of who you are. They won't judge your beauty based on who you are. They'll judge your beauty based on what they see. And then you become a tool. You become a utility. And that's the opposite of modesty and chastity. You want to be the person that is deeply attractive, not only because you are perhaps physically attractive, but because you have something that you bring to the table that makes you a desirable mate. And
I like that word discreet because, like, wrapping it up, kind of in a bow, it's like, can I wear earrings? Can I have tattoos? Can I do all of these things? Well, is it discreet? Like, you can do it without being excessive. You can do it without bringing so much attention to yourself. You're bringing the glory to the Lord. I mean, I feel like you can look nice and you can be beautiful. But is it over the top? Is it out of moderation? It's just.
Well, going back to Titus, what's interesting about Titus that I didn't talk about yesterday was that if you will notice, everything that a older woman is supposed to teach a younger woman is something that will make her attractive to a man. Domestically inclined, discreet, chaste, sober, vigilant. These are all things that make you attractive to a man. And people are going to hate that because they're like, what, domestically inclined? It makes you attractive to a man? You're darn tootin' it does.
I make good sourdough.
I mean,
I do not.
the truth of it is that guys are not overly attracted to women in power suits. That's not a thing. It's like they see that as a challenge, and when they are introduced into like a corporate environment or like a work environment as an equal, you probably experience this in the military. They view you as competition.
Yeah.
That's how they treat you. And that's not always good, and that's why women, when they get into the workplace as a equal with men, they oftentimes they see things as sexual harassment or whatever, or they get angry because they don't understand the culture of the workplace that men work in. And like being in the military, like if you ever worked with a group of men, it's gnarly.
I think the worst experience for me to have that in my face was when we were deployed to Bangladesh, India. And I was the only forklift operator. And this is a 15K forklift. This is not your little 6K putter around.
Yeah.
And we had to offload the 53 engines. And I am the only operator. And the forklift is at the airport. And the men would not give me the keys. So my interpreter, who was in the Marine Corps, had to get the keys out of their hand to then place them in mine.
Yeah.
And then I got to drive and operate. And that, to me, was just like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the only time I really experienced kind of that.
Yeah.
No.
I'm not saying that it's right.
Right.
All I'm saying is that's natural.
But that was a different culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And so most men are not going to be attracted to that type of a person that is trying to be co-equal with them.
Oh, yeah. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, to them, it was disgusting for me to even be standing in their presence. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these were civilian airport workers. These weren't
Yes.
U.S. military.
It
So
was
these
civilian.
were Indians, of which women are.
Yes.
Yeah.
are
The
And their
women-
culture is highly patriarchal anyway.
The only time I saw women is when they came in to scrub down the toilets.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they actually invited me to go have tea with them because they were just like,
That must have been fascinating.
they didn't allow me.
It definitely depends on your culture. Like, if you like just using a Lord of the Rings reference, right?
To which all life
if you
can be.
ask the average guy who was more attractive, Eowyn or what's the
The elf?
the elf girl? Eowyn was the daughter of the king of Rohan.
mhm.
And then what was
what was her name?
anyways, Liv
Liv Tyler's
Tyler's
Okay.
character.
Mhm.
Ask an average guy which one was more attractive. Eowyn will win 80% of the time.
Really?
Yep.
I thought the elf was
Nope.
because of the ears.
Nope. Nope. And the reason is because Eowyn is capable. In our culture, she would be.
In our culture.
Because America is a warrior culture.
Mm.
So in our culture, she would be preferred because she's like, even women who can't use a sword can die by one. That's a deeply attractive statement.
Mhm. But
know.
she was feminine.
But she was
Right.
still feminine.
Right.
Mhm.
That's
You didn't have to lose your
yeah,
femininity.
yeah, exactly. And
But
so,
she wasn't helpless. Like, I mean, and I don't think the elf was helpless, but she was definitely
no,
more
but-
pampered.
yeah, not by any stretch, but
was
she
needy.
exemplified a different type of feminine.
Yeah.
Well, I think like just with kind of wrapping this up is whether you decide to make a choice, you're still making a choice.
Mhm.
So if you're like, well, I'm not going to wear jewelry and I'm not going to wear makeup, I'll never wear a tattoo. That's still you making a choice. That's still you demonstrating what you want to communicate to others. So whether you do it, but it's just having the balance and wisdom in your choices
Yep.
of
Mhm.
what are you going to promote?
And I would say it kind of is like my final thing. I would just say that if you're a young person, perhaps wait until you've accumulated enough wisdom to make those decisions,
Mm,
particularly when it comes to tattoos
they're
and
expensive.
piercings for sure. I mean,
Well, piercings can close up. Unless
yeah,
they're
I mean, unless you're
gauges.
getting gauges.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
back in our day, we didn't have gauges. It was like, oh, you pierced your ear
3
Like,
times.
I was going to say maybe 10, but
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but that was, I don't know. Maybe I
Yeah,
didn't.
it was
know a lot more.
acceptable, but it wasn't acceptable in the 50s.
Mm,
So it's like time marches on, obviously, and cultures change or whatever. But I would just say, like, age is a big deal, man. I mean, wait to make these decisions until you've kind of developed who you are
right.
as a person, because you're still working on that. And you don't want to make decisions about who you are that you can't go back from. That's for
Mhm.
sure.
Or it's
So.
painful to get them removed.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any
And
last
very
words, Leslie?
expensive. I don't think so.
How about you, Kim?
No, I always find it very enlightening to have female-male conversations about what, like these topics, like what women believe men think and what men actually think.
Yeah.
And you're going, oh, okay. And then vice versa. I think they're very, I think that needs to be more because to women, men just think one way.
Mm,
That's like they just think about sex and they
Yeah,
just
that's our
think,
culture.
yeah, and so to girls, well, if men are only thinking about sex, and I need to be sexy,
mhm.
to attract that, and
Yeah.
so it's always interesting, and especially being from a mom's point of view who only has boys, finding out what they feel is attractive is very opposite in what I've always thought would be.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think more
Men are
conversations.
way deeper than people give them credit for. That's for sure.
Yes, they are.
Deep thoughts.
How about you, Ken? You got any final thoughts?
I guess if I had to summarize it, I would probably turn to 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature. So this is kind of the male side of what mostly we've been talking about. Because I've rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So if you have your heart straight with God, you have a clear conscience, you know what and how and why you're appearing as you do, and you're doing it for the glory of God, how you do that, whether it's piercings or makeup or tattoos or whatever, is going to be irrelevant.
Yep.
God's looking at your heart. Keep that the main thing.
Yep.
And you'll be fine.
And that's maturity for sure. All right. Well, that about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. If If you have a comment, question, or an idea for an episode, send us an email to 3p@athelbaptistchurch.org. If your idea gets used on the show, you, like Camille, could be the recipient of the now world-famous 3P coffee mug. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks to Athel Baptist Church and its members for their generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples who could do the same. And with that, we are out.